Welcome to all of you for this evening Artist Talk with Sara Trail from the Social Justice Sewing Academy here at Beacon Gallery. Sara, when I learned about you and saw that you started to sew at the young age of 4, I think my eyes popped out of my head. I was so impressed. And you have accomplished so much. You're a successful author, sewing teacher, and a pattern and fabric designer. You wrote a nationally published book, Sew with Sara, at the age of 13, that teaches teens and tweens how to sew cute clothes and accessories for fun and for profit. You have your own series of DVDs. You went to UC Berkeley and you created a quilt in memory of Trayvon Martin and his love of sewing and her love of sewing and passion, your love of sewing and passion for social justice intertwined at that moment. You went to Harvard and went to the Graduate School of Education there, which is where you founded the Social Justice Sewing Academy. And that is your platform where youth can create art that both engages and educates communities. So let's learn a little bit more about the Social Justice Sewing Academy and what it's doing. It was founded in 2017, and it's a youth education program that bridges artistic expression with activism to advocate for social justice. So you do hands-on workshops in schools, prisons, and community centers across the country, empowering youth to use textile art as a vehicle for personal transformation and community cohesion, and helping to become agents of social change. So many of the young artists make art that explore issues such as gender discrimination, mass incarceration, gun violence, and gentrification. And the quilt blocks are sent to volunteers around the world to embellish and embroider before being sewn together to be displayed in museums, galleries, and quilt shows. So we are so happy to have one of the pieces that you'll see upcoming in our show, Mixed Messages. This is a group show running from July 17th through the end of the month, August 30th. Anyone who is in the area is welcome to make an appointment or to walk in on Sundays 11 through 3. We're also open tomorrow for First Fridays until 8 p.m. The theme of the show is rape and sexual violence, and that is the theme of the piece that we also have from the Social Justice Sewing Academy. We have work by 6 different artists and collectives: the Tiny Pricks Project, the Social Justice Sewing Academy, which we're speaking to today, Rachel Tyne, Jean Sabara Jones, Ibrahim Ali Salam, and Raleigh Straught. We have already spoken to most of the people that are part of this project, so make sure to check out the blog in order to look at some of our past artist talks. Now let's have a look at some of your work. So this is the piece that we currently have here. And I have kind of a zoomed out version where you can see this. I wanted to really make it special so that people could appreciate that it came from you guys. And I used these cool things that you sent me, the Social Justice Sewing Academy, little logos and flyers behind it, and framed it so that people would really understand that it was something different and not just part of the Tiny Pricks Project. And we have the words, "She can still hear the words he said that day. You better not tell anyone I raped you. They won't believe you anyways." And this is one of the most powerful pieces, I think, in the show in terms of addressing rape head on. And so it's really been an amazing addition to the show. Now let's look at some of the other work. And you all can see that there's so many different types of pieces that come in and that address different types of ideas. This is just a small selection of what comes out of the Social Justice Sewing Academy. So much creativity. I think that's the last one that I have there. And yeah, I just wanted to spend a bit of time, Sara, with you, ask some questions, and why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? You started sewing super young. Can you tell us a bit about how you got into this art form?
Yeah, so my grandma taught me. I'm like a fourth, fifth generation of like, Black women who've sewed and made quilts for the most part. So I think I shared a bit about, my great great grandmother named Margaret Smart, who's like a woman who was bought from like an older Confederate soldier, who he raped her and she had a few mulatto kids, which turned out to be like my great grandparents and all that. But she made a quilt. And I think, coming and growing up, with the grandma who like, brought me in. My grandma's from Alabama. So going, to the South for summers or, weekends or trips out there and just seeing, cotton plants and seeing quilts made from like the resourcefulness of just like scraps that like, most would consider almost trash. He's been like, not that it's associated to trash, but just like, oh, worn out jeans, like, that upcycling and that, resourcefulness and using, like making beauty even in the scarcity of not having much, so I think, so, growing up, learning how to sew, I was definitely blessed to have two parents that invested in, my sewing ability to have mentors through classes. And so then, after that, a lot of opportunities came my way. And what originally started off as like an intention to just teach young kids how to sew, soon I realized how I was perpetuating levels of privilege in the inaccessibility of the things that I myself was teaching to low income kids, particularly kids from under resourced communities or just kids of color that didn't have as many entry points as the classes that I was teach would be starting with. For example, I'm teaching a class on PJs and Joann's. You have to come with a seam ripper, a $12 pattern, like 6 yards of fabric, elastic. Like there's just so many things that you had to even start to learn how to sew with. I'm like, this is inevitably like $100 investment almost, unless your grandma already had all this stuff like in her garage or something. So I'm like, PJs are like $8 at Walmart. The usefulness of the class is really low. People are paying for the class for the skill, which I respect, but it's blocking a lot of kids from having an access to learning this. So SGSA was really like a birth of an org that was going to do it for free, for the community like of young people, but with the community of like everyone else to do with the community of young people. Like it's not a project for, it's with. Everyone donates. Like it's a very restorative, community driven and community led project.
I love that. So I imagine a lot of people then are kind of giving back then once they learn to sew,
Yeah.
and then they're teaching others as well. And there must be a lot of community resources, which is fantastic. And speaking of community resources, it seems like you're also pulling your resources in a different way with something that you just announced on Instagram, which is a virtual business incubator program.
Yes, so I'm really excited to share. So we have gotten funding, majority from Genome. Shout out to them. They funded. We're going to be able to give over 30 kids a $1,000 seed grant, that they're going to get over like 2 months. They're going to get 250, then 2 more months, which is a 4-month mark. They're going to get another 250. Then after the last 2 months, which is the end of the 6-month mark, they're going to get the full 500. But there's going to be lectures each month that are going to be recorded that are going to be by industry experts in branding, in logos, in prototype, in scaling, in vision, mission statements, like all sorts of steps of doing a business or launching a project, or really just creating a brand. And then they're going to get money. The money is to be used, perhaps paying someone to do a logo for website help, depending on what their needs are for their particular projects. But another cool aspect of it is we're connecting mentors to each of these kids for the entire 6-month commitment. So if any of you are interested, I'd love for Kim Russell to share the mentorship link. But what it is you sign up and we're going to have a Zoom, before the program for the kids start. But it's really, it's 4 hours a month of a commitment and you're going to talk to the kid via Zoom, FaceTime, whatever their, preferred method of communication is. But really, do you need help on the homework? Do you want to brain idea anything with me? And it's really just connecting a group of kids who really don't have adults who are not only not listening, but really not believing in them. To just be there, and like they're going to get the funding from us, they're going to get instruction from us, but really connecting them one-on-one with an adult who's going to care, listen, and just help them, brain idea bounce and really just help them develop and grow, whatever project or, passion thing that they're working on.
That's fantastic. What age are you focusing on in particular for this program?
25. So it's a broad range, undergrad to middle school. I mean, it's like middle school is more like 13, 14, but there's some 15-year-old middle school. So it's really whatever, but it's 15 to 25. And if anyone knows of like an exceptional 14-year-old, we can always make a few, exceptions, but really it's 15 to 25, anywhere. It's not a, we have kids that are applying from Canada, like literally, you just have to commit to coming to the Zooms, where again, we're going to have a lecture with homework, and then SJSA is going to check in on the homework, assign mentors, and then really just support and help these kids get, their ideas developed. I think I was able to write a book at 12. So really, we should have started the incubator at 12, but I had really, really great parents that I don't necessarily know, we can start helping 12-year-olds, but 15, like, you can do stuff. And it's really just about, they just need resources. They just need mentors. They just need access. I can't tell you how many kids have made art in a one-time workshop where this is their first time experience working with textiles. And I'm like, you have like color and fashion and style sense of like Bisa Butler. Like you could be the next Bisa Butler, like, the 12-year-old version, if you just had someone, really to pour into you. And it's like, there's so many, there's just so much untapped talent and potential. And it's really just, sewing is a pretty affluent hobby. And it's not only affluent in the time of like, cotton's $12 to $15 a yard, yarn dyes start at 16. Like we know it's expensive, but also the time and the privilege to be able to create. Not a lot of kids, like we have kids that are, in school, they're doing the workshop because it's, high school, like it's in their 9 to 3 day, but really they're like, I have 4 kids at home. I don't have space to create. I don't, like it's more than that. Like kids go from high school straight to a job. When could they ever create? Like there's so many layers to really who has the opportunity, not only the opportunity, but who has the access, but then who has the time to sew. So being able to do space, like to go into spaces where youth are already giving their time, oftentimes required, we're in detention centers doing workshops. They're stuck there. This is just something they can do. And again, everyone has the agency to opt in or out. Nothing's ever forced, but really just, giving young people a space to create. It's been pretty a profound opportunity to witness as a workshop facilitator.
That's amazing, and such an opportunity to empower children and young adults, and for them to truly understand that they do have agency even at that young age, and to realize, like you did, that of what they're capable of when given the proper tools and opportunities by others. But so many, like you said, there's so many extenuating circumstances that can make that incredibly difficult. So it's great that you're able to do that to help give some people those opportunities. And I will mention that Kim did put in the chat the mentor application form. So if there's anyone that's interested, make sure to click on that. I will grab it as well. And I'll have that for afterwards also, so I can send that out to people if there's anyone who doesn't get it. So I already have one person who's saying that they're going to sign up, so that's fantastic. That is just fabulous. So do you continue to create yourself as well as someone who sews, or do you find yourself so consumed with the running of this organization and all these amazing ideas you have that you're very much focused on this side of it, the business side of it instead?
I would say more on the second, but I'd say I do get to piece a lot of the community quilts. So after kids do all the workshops, all the blocks come back. I definitely do have a hand in making the community quilts, which is fun because at that point it's like it's a selfless act of like, how can I piece around these kids' blocks that are gonna obviously like let quilters say, okay, someone does know how to sew, the piecing is cool, but really how do I amplify their messages and echo their blocks to make them that much more impactful. On another note, me and, a close friend, we're getting ready to make a quilt on Ruby Bridges. So that's going to be one of our new projects that we're doing.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, that's amazing. Here, I'm just going to actually pin you. So hopefully you'll stay up and be in front of everyone from now on. And who would you say, I mean, you talked about your grandmother, but do you have any other influences you'd like to talk about in terms of people who have inspired you as you've been working?
Yeah, I'd say between Sean, Latifa, Bisa, I think what's so cool is Instagram has allowed everyone to just connect. Like the fact you can send a DM and just like get to actually really know someone. There's a lot of Sylvia Hernandez, there's a lot of Martha Wolf, like there's a lot of between SACWA quilters. I've recently been accepted or honored with the position to be on the board of SACWA. So being personally, there's a SACWA book that came out when I was like 12. And there was this guy named Michael Cummings who made this beautiful quilt of like Jesus. And I saw in the book, I was like, wow, Black Jesus. I'd never seen that. I'm attending private Christian, very Eurocentric, like in Walnut Creek, like a really affluent white school. So I saw this quilt of a Black Jesus, and I remember being 12. I'm like, I want to do this. And so I made the quilt, like literally, like I liked his image. Let me make my own version of a Black Jesus. Really similar though to his image. That's what I saw in the book. And I'll never forget. I made the quilt, and I was so proud. And like C&T was like, okay, like Sara made a quilt inspired by Michael Cummings. Here's his original image. Whoop de whoop. His agent emailed and said, no, you can't do that. And it was really like a shocking moment of like, wow, like I was honoring, like I loved everything. I'm 12, like clearly it's nothing on your level. But the point is, it got, shut down. And I think that was just, another eye-opening moment of like, you can like something, but you've got to be careful of, what you copying with kids. And like, if you want to do something, either ask permission first but really, I think more importantly, it's like there's so much that you can see and just get inspired to want to create. And I think that right now with social media and Instagram and Twitter and Pinterest, like there's so much we can see, and there's so much kids, are inspired by, whether that's a viral meme going on or, like the amount of learning that social media is allowing people to do, or unlearning for that point, depending on, where you are in your socio-political development. I think in terms of cases of injustice, in terms of murders, in terms of, things happening in other countries, like I think a lot more things are accessible. So when some people are like, oh, well, why are kids always making such depressing, sad stuff? I'm like, it's depressing or sad. They want to see change. As Obama said, I think our generation and even the generation below me is really seeking to be the change that they want to see in the world. The fact that like so many millennials are in the streets right now during a national health crisis, and they're still protesting against systemic inequalities and injustice. I mean, that speaks to our values. And I say our, like very, it's an overgeneralization, but really, I think that there's a lot, to be said, to be learned, and to be created. And so I think when we really take the time to listen to young people and hear what they're making art about, I think another cool highlight that SGSA has shown me in my own places of privilege, in my proximity to issues. I'll go to Chicago and do a workshop with like over 100 kids, and like 90% of the blocks are on gang control, gun control, police brutality, and locked up. Then I'll do a workshop in like Palo Alto at another underfunded school in like East San Jose, but still within a like 30-minute drive of Stanford. And those kids are concerned with like immigration and DACA, and like you can just see the differences that are hitting communities and how they're like disproportionately being targeted by different stuff. But it's like all these kids, all these groups, regardless of where you are in the country, like, everyone has stuff that they care about. It's just who's listening.
That's fascinating. And you answered my next question, was kind of like where were the themes coming from? And they're coming directly from the children. Do you give them a prompt at the beginning when you're working with these groups of like what to put on their quilt or on their quilt square, or like how do you start that process?
I would say it's kind of like an open-ended question, like what matters to you. And if there's any issue in the world that you could end, fix, or change, or even just want to highlight, what would that look like, and how would you translate that? So I think a lot of it comes from the dialogue that we have as like a collective, like in the workshop, of like, what does sex trafficking look like? And kids will all shout out ideas, but it's like sex trafficking is like, we know it in concept, but what does it look like intangible? How would you draw sex trafficking without using the word sex trafficking? Would that look like a teddy bear being ripped off with its head, which is what some kids have said? Or would that look like, in Africa, in a boat, and like they'll say, well, people coming from here, and like international sex trafficking. I'm like, yeah, and it's also happening in our own communities. I know Oakland, on a street called International, is known for sex trafficking and having minors and all sorts of, and then even empowering of sex work, and young kids, in certain communities are like, well, they should be able to get paid and have W-2s so they can get, like, there's all these conversations that come from it. And it's really just about, let's talk about it. So do you want to highlight, what you want to see happen in the sex world? Or do you want to, even strippers, like there's so many conversations that kids are just concerned with, like, well, if I want to do it, I should be able to get paid right. And, like, I mean, it's just really like, let's listen, let's talk. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really your opinion, your perspective, and your art.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of people who might think that these are topics who might be too like mature for children. But the thing is that kids are thinking about this stuff, and they need an opportunity to get out these ideas. And often having, I think, a tangible item to help them kind of talk about it allows the conversation to flow more easily, I think. And so that's one of the things I think that's so wonderful about what you're doing, is that I think that, as I said in so many of these other talks, that art is therapy in a way, and this is kind of a conduit for a lot of conversations that I think we should be having or need to have.
No, definitely. I think especially for a lot of these communities that are like disproportionately impacted by trauma. Like, trauma
Exactly.
is really out of their hand. This is a very therapeutic process where they can talk, they can discuss. And if they, if they're not necessarily good, or if they're not liking, they can always ask for help. I think it's so cool to see kids like, oh, well, you did that really well. Can you help mine? And I think like the community that, I mean, not only the community that happens in the workshop, but I think the community that it then is transcending to like, hitting through the mailing. We have this huge intergenerational collaborative model that allows, for the most part, adults to be embroidering and like enhancing minor, just to sum up an age group, art. And it's like, like that's kind of flipping the dichotomy on whose art is valuable, whose art is, worth showing in an exhibit. The fact that someone's first quote block ever is hanging in an exhibit in Boston, like that's pretty profound.
And it's an amazing one and touches me every time I see it. Um, is there anything that you can share about it without divulging any personal information? Or is there anything you can tell us about it?
Yeah, young girl made it, didn't want to share her artist statement, but shared she'd been a victim of rape. And so that was why she kind of didn't want her artist statement or her name associated. But I think her just saying, is this going to be okay? Can I ask for this to be embroidered? Will they be upset? And I'm just like, hey, whatever you want to be embroidered, the embroidery volunteers will do. But yeah, and again, she wasn't like, I asked like, as a mandated reporter, do we need to report this? And she was like, no, it's in the past. Like, I've already told people. And it's like, okay. But I think oftentimes, issues of trauma, like rape come up, issues of abuse come up, issues of abandonment, neglect, a lot of, parents that are systemically locked up, siblings that have been killed. Like a lot, like I think oftentimes people just like, oh well, kids aren't thinking about that. Kids are, and it's really like disproportionately impacting them all. So
Yeah, well, I hope that this person aware that her piece then is in the show.
yes. I showed her once Diana, introduced us. I was like, guess what? And she was just like, that's cool. Just an Instagram DM.
That makes me happy. I'm glad to know that. So it's a little hard to know kind of like what the mechanism is behind everything. And so that's delightful. Um, can you tell me what are some of do you have any meaningful experiences that you've had as an artist or in your work that you've been doing that you could share with us? Is there anything that comes to mind? I know it might be hard to kind of come up with something like on the spot like that, but
No, I'd say like, for example, there's this young guy named Juan. Juan was one in our initial 2016 summer program. And there's a really cool podcast that I would love for Kim to find the link. It's on the Instagram website. I think it's the craft industry. It's Abby's podcast. But there was an exhibit in like near, I don't know where, New England Quilt Museum. And she flew me and a kid out.
the
Um,
craft museum.
no, it's the New England Quilt Museum. It's
Okay,
in
sorry.
Brockton. It's
Okay.
in Brockton, I believe. But
Oh,
she flew me and Juan out. And so first off, Juan's never left California. So the fact that his first time leaving California was to go speak, out of state, that was pretty cool. But Juan was like a 20-year-old high school graduate that graduated at the age of 20, not due to any of his own inadequacies, but really due to the fact that his family had been evicted 4 times in like 5 years, and he'd gone to so many high schools, his credits didn't always align. And then after a while, he definitely tapped out mentally. But he was in the initial summer program because he was an at-risk kid, and him participating in the summer program was going to give him academic credit. So the SRC summer program is like 4 or 5 hours a day of like a lot of like critical race education with homework and youth participatory action and readings from Audre Lorde and James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and Kimberly Crenshaw and just a lot of homework. And then the afternoon was spent like creating, but it was creating like research informed art. So like they were researching what they cared about, and then I was just guiding them with specific, resources and like, okay, you want to talk about gentrification? Well, you need to start with like the history of white flight and the movement to the suburbs, and then like, let's talk about redlining in the Bay Area. Let's talk about your city. Like let's go to the maps and we can find resources together. But every kid was doing their own thing, so it was very tailored personal research to what they cared about. But Juan, came to the program and he was like, I don't want to sew. Sewing is for girls. I'm only here because I'm about to get expelled. He had a very like ID give AF attitude. And so I was just like, Juan, like this isn't about sewing. And for you to hit with such gendered language, like let's talk about it. But after a while, like after we started reframing the rhetoric, like you're getting ready to be a textile artist, making art about something you care about. Like being a textile artist is very different than being a sewer to a young, gang involved kid. And so for Juan to be able to see that like transformation through the 6 weeks with him particularly, he did this initial 6 week summer program, and then he's come to like 3 additional workshops just because he enjoys making stuff out of textiles. And so Juan has his own sewing machine. He's like, Sarah, my machine is broke. Can you come fix it? I'm like, take it to a shop and then I'll Apple Pay you. Get your own, figure it out. I can't come to you every time, you mess something up. But for the most part, there's just, so many stories of kids who've like made something and then they went on to make more blocks, or they've become a workshop facilitator, or they've really just fallen in love with the process and the hands-on, feeling and experience creating with art that are just really proud to see. But I would definitely encourage to hear directly from youth. Definitely check out the podcast link that Kim has shared.
Yes, she did share it, and thank you. And wow, what an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. And so you're working so much with, as an educator, we'll say, with all ages, it sounds like, and with so many different people. What is there a piece of advice that you would give to aspiring creators out there?
For young kids or for adults? Because I think the advice would be different for both.
Why don't you do both then?
So I'd say for young kids, I'd say like there's no limits. I'd say that there's really no rules. I'd say do what you want, how you want. Don't let, for example, the rigidity of like sewing or like the focus on 1/4 inch seams or seam allowances matching and the perfection. I'd really say like do it your own way, because there's no such thing as the right way. There's not one right way. There's multiple right ways. For creatives, it's like adults, I'd say, continue to do what you've done. But if you want to inspire and work with nurturing young people, I'd say that there's a very I'd say like slow and like intentional approach that really like leads on your accountability to really like developing them into what they want to be. And I say that because I've had mentors from like 12 and under that were like, okay, this is the way you do it. Like, Sarah, you're sewing too fast. Sarah, pick out the seams. Sarah, these colors don't match. Go look back at your color wheel. You need to use complementary colors. And I think because I had parents that just encouraged me to the moon and back. So, getting constructive criticism didn't really affect me just because of the amount of support I had at home. But I think for some kids who might not have parents that are like helping them every step of the way, it's like that can really be a dream crusher. That can really be, an idea killer. And I think oftentimes, even if it is true that their colors don't match, or, I have kids that want to use the wrong side of fabric, and I say the wrong side by like, there's a right side of fabric and a wrong. If they want to use the wrong side, who cares? Right. Let them, it's their, like if they love the wrong side better, like there's no such thing as the wrong side. But like in the sewing world, there's oftentimes like rules and like even unconsciously that we all might be abiding by. And I just really, would encourage people, particularly when working with young people, really try to like, just abolish all rules and really just let it be like use sewing as a medium to do what you want, as opposed to like let it be a blank number. Don't hit them with sewing from like a paint by number, if that analogy makes sense. Like don't have them focus on filling within the lines and really just let them use it as a blank canvas to do what they want. And then if they want to like obviously get further and like really pursue the craft, then let them learn 1/4 inch seams and like about perfection and all that. Like that's not to say that that's not a valued trade in an aspect of sewing, but really just let them have fun with it. And then, once you get them hooked, then you can go with the rules. It's just like starting backwards. I started backwards. I learned sewing the right way first, and then I unlearned it and started having more fun with it.
Sure. And it's definitely about knowing your audience as well, because there's some people like you, I think, who can cope with, learning kind of formally first and then unlearning. But then there are other people who just disengage completely. Right. And you don't want to turn them off because you're so obsessed with kind of, I'm definitely a type A personality. So I'm going to take your advice and heed it, especially with my own children. I might have, those thoughts every once in a while about the right way and the wrong way of doing things. So what are some of the best ways that the people on this call can support you and Social Justice Sewing Academy, whether we're near or far?
I would say right now we have a second cool project. Well, we have 2 cool projects that people, one being a mentor, 3 total. 1, you can be a mentor. 2, you can always donate a sewing machine, fabric, rotary cutters, blades, scissors, anything, because we do give them out to youth particularly during our summer program. So we're always restocking. But I'd say even more like tangibly and more immediate, we have this new project called Quilts of Remembrance. What Quilts of Remembrance are is us meeting a need that was kind of brought up of who makes families of victims quilts when their loved ones gets murdered, kind of by like institutions or systems of like white supremacy, like whether that's by a law enforcing officer, whether that's by a neighbor that felt emboldened, whether that's because you wore a hoodie and you just get killed by someone random, whether that's black on black violence. Like there's systems that are, you know, perpetuating poverty and inequality that are killing people. And so there wasn't really an organized group where it's like you could get a quilt you know, made for those systems, as opposed to like after Katrina hit or after the Pulse massacre in Florida, like quilt guilds came together, like, let's make those families quilts. But those were like very like, you know, isolated national disasters. That was like one group. And so like as a whole, people in America are losing loved ones all the time. So SGSA is, you know, taking on an initiative to work to reaching out to families of, hey, we've noticed you've lost someone. We're so sorry to hear that. Would you like a custom quilt made in their honor? You can give us clothes, or you can give photos, or, you know, really whatever you're comfortable releasing to get a custom quilt made. So if you are a traditional quilter and you like seams and all that fun stuff, feel free to, you know, sign up to do a quilt of remembrance. And so that is making an entire quilt top. We can then pair you with a volunteer long armor, or if you're, you know, that amazing and you can do it all, feel free to, you know, finish the quilt. So that's making an entire quilt for a family. Then as a supplement to that, we have met a lot of needs of community organizing groups of wanting things to be able to display on a broader scale, called the Remembrance Project. And the Remembrance Project is, Kim could send a link for both. You sign up to get assigned a name, and when you get a name, it'll be like, we're assigning you a name. We'll tell you the age, where they're from, and you know, how old they were, or no, where they're from, their age, and their name. We'll just give you 3 details and any relevant, you know, news articles, links that we may have found in, you know, our own research. But you're getting a name, and your job is really just to memorialize them on a 21 by 24 inch piece of fabric. And that could include sewing, it can include applique, needle turn, paper piecing. It can be whatever. It's just have their name. The only real requirement is to have the person's name on the block, in whatever size, whether that's pieced, embroidery, or, you know, it can be whatever. But and I think like the goal of that is to then be able to, like the AIDS quilt, lay them out in communities, and they're not going to be on the floor. They're going to be on quilt racks. You know, we're not going to get them dirty, but you know, just to lay them in communities that are, you know, having demonstrations or protests, or really just, you know, even if it's a fundraiser, like, let's not forget all these names. Not everyone's name is going to go viral. Not everyone's name is going to be recorded and be the next, you know, Instagram sensation or the next cause of justice. Not everyone's name is going to have thousands of people demanding justice, but everyone's name matters because everyone's life mattered. So it's really an act of solidarity from like the textile, fiber, sewing, quilting, all the industries that, you know, our intersectionality of our own identities that we're part of. It's making a block in remembrance of, I see you, I hear for you, and, you know, I hope we can get justice. And whether there's action items, or even if it's someone like Mike Brown, where the DA has already said, yeah, the police officer is not guilty, oh well. You know, qualified immunity is something that, you know, we're working on, you know, as a community and as a country, to really like, well, where is the accountability of, if, you know, you have a badge and you do kill someone unarmed, is it just an, oh well, you know? So I think, and again, it's not a BLM project. It's not a police brutality project. It's Summer Walker, a young person that was killed just because of protest, like a guy ran through, you know, entire protest. They were out there protesting Black Lives Matter. They got killed. That wasn't, you know, that's not a law enforcement thing. Summer Taylor, they were just murdered, you know, in an act of hate, in an act of impatience, in an act of whatever. And that wasn't as intentional as some others, but either way, their life mattered. So it's just honoring dozens of lives. And if anyone is interested, there's an Instagram account for just the panels. If you want to look at more, Kim, we want to drop that in the comments too. But it's like Sew for Justice with the number 4. But it's just an Instagram page that you can really just see, and you can see, I mean, the way that the panels are being created. You can get inspired to make your own. You can obviously sign up, we'll send you a name, and then it's just to go back, you know, to a larger project. But really, I'd say it's similar to the AIDS quilt in the sense that we want to show it. It needs to be in public. It's not a, you know, necessarily an exhibit piece, but more so a community piece. So we can continue to show communities that, you know, we do care, you know, we do see and we do value, you know, everyone, regardless of how viral that their murder or death may have been.
Those are some amazing projects. Thank you for sharing those. And I know you're looking at the chat, but anyone who's not looking at the chat, make sure you pull that up in case you want to grab those links. You can click on them, and the handle for Instagram is also in there. Before we go into questions from the audience, so if you are in the audience, you can start putting some questions in the chat if you like, or you can think about unmuting yourself. Is there anything else you want the audience here today to know? Is there anything that you haven't shared yet and you're like, oh, it'd be really good for everyone here to know about this or that, or this other thing we're doing, or I always like sharing X, Y, or Z when I'm talking to people?
Wow. So Karen shared, she's quoting a quote for Alex Flores. So I think that I would really just want people to know that, like, I think more than anything, the sewing industry is not at all like the 17 of us that are here. I think as a whole, the sewing industry as a culture is oftentimes overtly racist. And I think that we all need to just be, prodded a bit to, like, if you see something, say something. I don't think people realize, like, letting, someone just comment rude stuff on Husqvarna's, post for like an embroidery call for, diversity of BLM patterns. And like, I think oftentimes it might be little, but like microaggressions matter. I can't tell you how many quilters and makers of color have came to me like, Sarah, I don't even want to go to sewing retreats because it's like microaggressions, they add up. And it's like, I think as a community, we can do a little more intentionality with being more inclusive, with listening, to following a diverse feed, to highlighting a diverse feed, everything from like exhibit curation to, from honoring youth to trans to non-binary. Like, there's so many aspects that are really just underrepresented. And I think, like, as us individual, like, if we all intentionally take a stand, I think that it's like, it's really just about, like, neutral is not helping. So if anything, I would say is like, we've got to, like, not just be neutral. And like, you can say in my heart, I feel this way, but I'm not saying anything. I'd really just kind of make the gentle push or nudge to, like, you got to kind of do more, because neutrality, silence is violence. And I don't mean that, in a figurative way, but really like in a literal, intangible way. Not saying anything, can be harmful. But I would just, again.
If I can jump in and just say that I'll unpin this. Personally experienced that when I posted an article, and I think as a white person, you don't kind of get that nearly as much. And so it took me a long time to realize that lesson, but I posted an article and all I got was attacked and hatred on it. And I'm sure that other people agreed with what I was saying, but none of those people said anything. And all of a sudden I realized exactly what was being said when you say silence is violence. And I could not possibly agree with you more. And once I had that one experience, I swore to myself I would never let something like that pass me by again if I saw an opportunity to stand up for something that I saw was wrong.
And I think that's it. And I think oftentimes people are like, oh, well, my comment's not going to make it. It really does. Like, and I think even in the sewing world, like, it's like, if it's going to be overrun with, if the people that hate things are the loudest ones speaking, where's everybody else? Because as a whole, I feel like SGSA has 3,000 embroidery volunteers that I'd say ideologies are very similar to mine. But if they're not, the ones that are being vocal, and they're not the ones, countering, comments such as all lives matter and sewing's not political and you don't need to say stuff and this is my piece. Like, giving a personal example, in January, we had a Block of the Month injustice for Paducah National Quilt Museum. And the amount of hatred, like vitriol that was just being spewed in the Paducah, and granted, it's Paducah, Kentucky, but just because it's in Kentucky doesn't mean it needs to be, racist. But again, there's no one from SGSA in that Facebook group. And I'd say the first like 300-400 comments were like, this is terrible, and Trayvon deserved to be killed. And the comments were just so overwhelmingly problematic. I was just like, and I put it on Instagram, like, hey, SGSA community, can you please come in? And again, whiteness often needs to speak to whiteness. As a 24-year-old Black person, I can't have the emotional labor of trying to battle every racist out here. But if the community can have these conversations, the community can counter, whether we bring them in with love or whether we just shut them down. Like, not all quilters think like you, and like anything, but like, being an ally visibly, can really make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important, I think, to have a group that anyone who finds themselves in that situation, like you, for instance, feels like they can call people into those conversations. I think that's my biggest fear, is that I'm missing out on those conversations and don't know where I can kind of like direct my defense sometimes, you know. But I'm glad to hear that you did that, that you kind of went to your community, and hopefully they did. Did they come in and back you up?
They did, but I mean, it was like 20,000 of them and like a few hundred of us, but they definitely did. But I mean, like the few hundred of us commented back to like dozens of them. So when everybody speaks to dozens, it's like overwhelmingly like, the conversations. And I think a few of the people that were like, well, they didn't like the block because, and it's like the block just said, and erasing the in out of injustice. The block wanted to just say justice. Like it was a very, right. Like it was a very, I thought it was a PG block. I'm like, imagine if we would have done rape culture or something that really would have.
Yeah, get me involved next time, and I'll come up with something really feisty. Can everyone see this? So this is the embroidery version of it. This is not the original, but just to give kind of like a visual for generally what we're talking about. And it's actually probably one of my favorite things that you've done. I love that one. I think it's such a fantastic visual of what you are trying to.
Right. Yeah, we're really just trying to raise injustice, and not just in the world, but particularly, the sewing, like I'm over here, like, let's bring youth in. It's like, no one wants to bring youth into a culture that, doesn't, appreciate first time cultures that, like you gotta be like, you gotta be the change that we want to see in the world. And I think I should say it's an amazing community, but like on the grand scheme of how large the sewing industry are, is, we're a really small sampling size. But I'm like, if we could just permeate into all spaces where like people can look at the sewing world of like, no, they're very, inclusive, and they don't like hate speech, and they don't, like, I just think that, we can all do our part to make this industry, make this culture, make this community, on a grand scheme, a better and more, not only safe space, because oftentimes safe is like perpetuating mainstream culture, which is oftentimes synonymous with like white culture, but a brave space where everyone can, have their best foot forward, and say what they feel and how they feel, without being attacked, and not advocating for cancel culture, but really just knowing, it's not all about you. Like, let everyone have a turn to speak, regardless if they only have, 6 months experience versus your 25 years.
Making it a brave space. I love that. What a great idea. With that, why don't we see if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask? So you can either unmute yourself if you can figure out how to do that, or I'm already seeing a question coming up in the chat box, which is
Yes,
fantastic.
Holly. So did I feel welcomed and supported by SACWA? Initially, yes, SACWA allowed not only me to come, but 4 youth to come to an initial, it was called the SACWA San Jose conference. How's it going, Holly? And it was an amazing conference. Kids got to speak in San Jose, and again, SACWA is often, even in the sewing world, thought of like the Lamborghini of quilters. Of like, there's normal quilters like MQG that like we're just cool people that make quilts, and then there's SACWA that are like master art quilters that about exhibits and stuff. And so I think for SACWA to have a panel of listening to first time quilters, that was an interesting dichotomy on like quote unquote master. And I say masters in quotation marks because there's, those are standards. Those are social. It's like race. There's really no such thing as a master. But I get it for the point of, they're experienced. Let's just sum up with that. But I think for SACWA to not only allow the kids, for me to speak, but to bring the kids, I think that was a strong piece. Since then, one of my mentors, Martha, who's in SACWA, nominated me for the board, and the board was like, we do want to say something. And then I think since being on the board, something that was in the first month, I'm like, hey, SACWA needs to make a stand. And I think, the initial feedback, from the president was like, hey, we don't say political stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's not about politics. This is really just making a stand with an oppressed group right now. And this is about more humanity. And they were like, okay, let's draft something. Let's make a meeting. And they did. So I'd say for the most part, yeah, they've been pretty amazing. And I'm definitely encouraging them, to be mentors. But again, some SACWA people are like full-time artists, and they make art as their living. And so, sometimes people don't have the time to give to be a mentor and stuff. But SACWA, particularly Martha Wolf, has been really just amazingly supportive of all SJSA things in general. So that's been pretty cool. As has MQG. MQG, a lot of people, MQG has been from lectures to, I'd say 75% of all embroidery volunteers are MQG members, which, like I wouldn't say SACWA the SACWA, I guess, volunteers that we have are like doing full quilts, doing remembrance projects. They're showing up in terms of helping teach youth, but in terms of actual like coming to workshops and helping kids hands-on, MQG members have like killed it in that, for the most part, that regard.
So Modern Quilt Guild.
Yes.
Thank you, Kim. Some other questions? Such interesting information. This is a whole world, by the way, that I know nothing about. The closest I've gotten to working with textiles, I think, was putting up some of these pieces on onto the fabric on the walls. So, but you got, I find what you do, Sarah and Diana, as well from the Tiny Pricks Project, who's also on this call, incredibly inspiring. So maybe one day I will pick up a needle and thread.
You know, you got to get started with embroidery. I've heard that's like the gateway drug to sewing. So embroidery is something that you could take like anywhere, and it's like get a hoop and, you know, start something, and then, you know, get a machine and, you know, get to going. But embroidery is definitely like a fun entry point. Because if you mess up, it's okay. You can pull it out. And if you find someone that's good, it's like, hey, do you want to help me? Like, you can bring it, and it's a really tangible, you know, easy, accessible, you know, thing to do.
Yeah.
Are there other worlds you're exploring outside of the quilting world, other types of galleries? So we had like the entire year of 2020 booked for exhibits, but everything got canceled. So like we had an exhibit at the Ruth Funk Textile Museum in Florida, and that literally canceled because of COVID. Like they just defunded their entire football team and their museums. So a lot of the art galleries that we had got pushed back to 2021. Some important, you know, upcoming things that are still happening this year, at the Bill Clinton like presidential library, something in Arkansas, where we have kids that made blocks. We had this like in-depth lecture on the suffragette movement, and we talked about voting rights and how, you know, people say, oh, the voting act of like 19, I don't know, 64 or whatever year the Voting Right Act was, and how that, you know, that happened, but Black women still couldn't vote for like another decade later. And it's oftentimes like 4th of July. Like you say, oh, in 1776. It's like, no, Black people weren't free till like 1864. So like, just because it happened for America one day, that doesn't mean that it happened for all Americans. So really, we had, you know, in-depth, you know, conversation on voting and how women fought for that, and why did men get to vote first, and like, you know, who white men voted, and then other, like, we just talked about the breakdown, the timeline, and really just an accurate version of voting, you know, history. And then we talked about voter suppression. We analyzed, you know, articles and talked about everything from Stacey Abrams to what, you know, voting by mail is going to look like. And we have lots of group chats going with kids, and we share, you know, resources and articles. But that's like a lot of the things that we do are really based in the learning that happens beforehand of the art creation. But in terms of like other galleries, we don't reach out for anything. It's always like really like an introduction, like Diane did. Yeah, corporations have art on the walls. You know, we had Kaiser reach out, and then they saw the entire website, and then they basically pulled out because they were like, you guys are a little too political. But, you know, I understand. Kaiser can only have cats and kittens. But if there is any corporation that would, you know, want to, like, absolutely, we've had like a tech firm in Silicon Valley that definitely was like, we'll show it because we're very progressive, you know. But again, it's really about like invitation, because exhibitions isn't something that we're actively reaching out for, but like who reaches out to us, we will then, like, of course, make something happen.
Do you actually sell your work, or would you just kind of be like renting it out to?
Renting it out. I think selling work that youth make would be like an exploitive model of child labor that we would never engage in.
Yeah, I guess that's very true. I wasn't sure how that would work. Or
Yeah, no, it's just like you can loan it, you can exhibit it, make sure that, you know, you don't let people touch it or get it dirty. But other than that, it's very and it, particularly our embroidery volunteers, they're members of libraries and community centers and youth groups and YMCA's and Boys Clubs of America. Really, I think our volunteer embroidery, like their network, is oftentimes where the work gets shown, because they're like, oh, I work somewhere. We can, you know. So it's really about, like, again, the community. It's like their community made quilts. 20 kids make blocks, 20 embroidery volunteers embroider the blocks. Me and a team of like an entire quilt guild for like a few weekends will piece the quilt. And we have another volunteer who will long arm the quilt. Like, a lot of hands have made, you know, gone into that. So there's obviously, you know, with kids getting agency and ownership of the art, there's a lot of people who have helped. There's a lot of people who might want to show it, which has, you know, been pretty beneficial for the most part. How many quilts are there? I'd say we have like 30 community quilts, which means 30 times 20. And we have at least like 100 blocks waiting to go into community quilts. And then we have maybe 25 mini quilts. We had a big snafu at the beginning of COVID where we had shipped out quilts, and the person who shipped them back didn't insure them, and FedEx truck got in an accident, and we lost like 7 kids' quilts just via FedEx. And they're like, oh, well, you didn't insure them, so we're sorry. And I'm like, yeah, it was 7. It was 7. Like, it was a community quilt, it was kids quilts, it was 7 quilts from an exhibition. So it's like, I don't know, with the way that, you know, the post office and mailing and all that has been recently, it's like, Yeah, and there's no way to put a price on the work. And the worst part is we'd never gotten them professionally insured, so they were like, "Oh well, they're kids' quilts," and I'm like, "Yeah, but this is months of everyone." It was just pretty tragic. So at this point, it's like I only want to ship if it's super insured, super tracked, and super like some serious type of shipping.
I was just writing it privately. I just became an appraiser, so if you want me to like appraise your quilts for you.
Absolutely, we'd love that letter so we can make something like, "Hey, FedEx, that they're
Yeah.
actually worth something."
Although, what I will say is that FedEx will only insure up to $1,000 per package. So just for all of you out there. So so there is that as well, alas. But we can talk about this more offline. But yeah, I'd be happy to help you with that, just to help you guys out in some way. And yes, I agree that the quilts are priceless, but alas, that's not how the insurance industry works.
Yeah.
Um, those are you have a ton of quilts. How are you on a practical level? How are you storing them? Where are you storing them?
My parents, my dad has like 3-car garage, and like 1-car garage is all SGSA, and my parents are very dutiful volunteers who will ship and receive and pack up, and I'm like, make sure you guys label it well, because I live with roommates and have a lot smaller house. I've moved out, and so I'm like, the fact that you lost me, you got SGSA. I went to college, moved out, and now you have SGSA, so it was like a fair trade, because either way you have to have something, as I am an only child, and so I feel like my presence needs to be there regardless.
It sounds like it is. It sounds like it is. Can you get a bulk insurance package separate from shipping? That's what I did instead of insuring the package.
I have no idea what that is, but if you would love to DM and explain it to me, and just
Oh,
and
yeah.
even like is
Karen, yeah, I don't know what that is, but probably something to take offline in terms of if someone has some ideas for how yeah, and I have some other ideas on insurance as well, but yeah, we'll bring that. Yeah, well, I have like an inland marine policy that should insure things at wherever they are in the world. But again, we'll talk about that another time, another place. But thank you, Karen, for the ideas. Um, any last questions before we wrap this up? Because I don't want to take too much of everyone's time. And I see we're coming up to almost 7 o'clock, and we've probably exhausted you with all these questions and all this amazing information that you've given us. This has been fantastic.
how's SGSA's work shifting during COVID? I'd say our workshops were, I think right now, I think given the world's awakening to systemic racism, we're definitely giving a lot more focuses towards quilt guilds and encouraging quilters to stand up, speak up, working with learning on the adult side instead of like our past 3-4 year focus on curriculum stuff for kids. And with that, I'd say, Kim, do you want to share the SJSA learning community? If you are a member of Facebook, we have this really active and amazing Facebook group where you can learn and engage, often in a lot of unlearning, but I mean, like there's units on whiteness, there's units on how to be an ally, there's units on black crime, there's units on tone policing. Like there's just, each week we drop units and they're just like PDFs, readings, everything's free. And we're really doing an intentional job of curating. So, like ideally, if you followed since the beginning of the year, we're at 52 units, that are going to be dropped by the end of 2020. That is just like, it's a conglomeration of just learning. So it's like, if you want to join the group, we'd love to have you, love to contribute. And if you have any questions, like for example, I have a really close volunteer that's like, hey, Sarah, my brother is voting for Trump. He's my blood brother. And I'm like, let's talk about it. Let's pose it in the learning community. Like there's things that, you can share, and like, there's resources, and why don't you send these resources? Why don't you ask these questions? And it's really just a community to like, help you through anything that is like on the spectrum of your own socio-political development, whether you're super advanced, you're like, my whole family is good. Okay, well then why don't you start talking to your neighbors? Let's start there. Oh, I'm in rural Maine, and like I'm really intentional with my friends. I'm not friends with them. Like not being friends with them isn't going to change anyone's minds. Like this is a space where you can learn and figure out, how to use your voice, or even if you just want to amplify and talk about other issues, or like, hey, I saw this kid made a block on sex work and sex, trafficking. Like, what do they mean by this? Here's some articles. Let's learn. I don't know, even, someone could post like, I didn't understand what Kaepernick was talking about. Here's some article. Here's a unit on it. Like, but if there's anything, you want to learn more on, it's just an idea that, an entire community is dedicated to pulling resources together and really just being again, not safe, but a brave space, you know, to challenge, push, and, you know, just, it's just a learning community.
I love that. I'm definitely going to check that out. Um, I think that finding resources to help educate people is, in educating oneself. I mean, that's definitely something that I am always doing. But I'm definitely going to look there and see what you have to offer for all of us. So thank you so much. You are doing a lot of brave space making, we'll say.
Well, I appreciate your time and appreciate, you know, checking in with everyone. I definitely, you know, if you guys, if any of you are interested, we have a really cool like Facebook group. If any of you guys want, or not Facebook, Instagram group, because you're not on Facebook and you want to be in like an Instagram, you know, like we have a big group chat, send SGSA a DM like, hey, I want to be in the Instagram group. And it's literally just like a block of the month group. And you don't have to be making a block of the month. It's just a fun space where you share ideas and other social justice quotes and really just, we just share stuff. So if anyone wants to be, you know, in that DM just because you want more intentional, like fiber textile artists, social justice oriented community, you know, reach out. We'd love to, you know, talk more and, you know, everything else.
Thank you. What I will attempt to do is take, because there's so many great resources that are in the chat, because I'm recording this, I'll get, the whole chat will kind of get pulled out afterwards. So I'll have all of these, and I should have everyone's emails because they all signed up, and I can send everyone a message and kind of say, okay, so we had this, we had this, we had this. And so hopefully that will help kind of capture anyone who wanted to actually sign up for these things. Will be able to. You're also welcome to go into the chat now, anyone who wants to, and just do a copy paste for yourself into like your notes or into a Word document. But I will try to make sure that that happens. And thank you so much, Sarah. I hope we'll keep in touch. I definitely want to know what you keep doing, because everything you're doing is incredibly inspiring and exciting, and I love it all. And I'm so happy that we got to talk this evening.
No, thank you. Thank you. Nice talking with everyone. Hope everyone has a good rest of the afternoon.
Yep. And you too. And take care, everyone.